Welcome. Poets, bards, and even statesmen have often tried to say what the true measure of a man is. Some say it's if he befriended those that are truly in need, or if he played his God-given part. Others say it's how he treats people who can do him absolutely no good, or how many men he serves, or how he handles his failures. I, however, like something I heard in church as a child. The true measure of a man is how much love he has in his life. The man who was buried on this site, George Harris Culver, was a man who had much love in his life. I know, for I am Mary Yemen Culver, his wife. George was not only loved by many, but he loved many, especially his family. And wasn't he quite the handsome fellow? He was born on a nice...
November 9th, 1903. I was born right here in Glens Falls. My parents were Wesley and Lena Culver, and they are buried just up the hill. Well, I grew up here. I attended public school here. And when I was in school,
Excuse me, George. I think maybe they'd be more interested in your various careers.
Yes, I think you're right. In 1927, I was appointed special policeman. You know, law enforcement always fascinated me. Well, 3 years later, I was named to the force, a real officer. And in 1932, I was named acting captain, and the very next year, chief of police for the city of Glens Falls. Well, this was a real high for me, and my family was so excited. In 1937, I had the privilege of attending and graduating from the National Police Academy. That was conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The school had been formed in 1930 when it was determined that the training of local police officers was as important to national security as the FBI agents themselves.
And as I recall, that training had quite an effect on the rest of your career.
It certainly did, Mary. From my attendance at the school, I decided that training would be the focal point of my work. So I took every opportunity to attend whatever training sessions I could. Subsequently, I attended the police training school for the state of New York, the municipal training school for police chiefs, both sponsored by the New York Council of Mayors. And because of my work at the National Academy, I was able to get agents from the FBI to conduct training sessions for the members of the Glens Falls Police Department, as well as for local policemen from neighboring towns and villages. These courses contained work in many facets of police work, like civics, interviewing, raids, riots, jiu-jitsu, transporting prisoners, and even the use of tear gas and so on.
And I am sure that your efforts in that regard greatly improved the safety and security of Glens Falls and even surrounding towns. It also opened up other avenues of work for George. In May of 1940, George took a leave of absence from the force to become a detective for the Automobile Underwriters Detective Bureau. Then, in September of that year, he returned as chief of police. But just 10 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, George was hired by J. Edgar Hoover to be an FBI investigator, a G-man. Oh, George was assigned to the Buffalo office. And of course, what he did was classified. But I know it had something to do with preventing suspicious characters from getting their hands on radios or weapons. Then, in May of 1942, George returned as chief of police.
In 1944, my salary as chief of police here in Glens Falls was $2,500. The salary of a big city police chief was $3,500. Well, I felt that with all my training and experience, I was worth the big city salary. And I said I would resign if I did not get the increase. But Mayor John Bazinet, however, thought my request unrealistic. And even though I had done a good job, my resignation would be accepted. Well, I gave it much thought. And then decided to resign. No, I couldn't do that. I retracted my resignation. But in 1945, I once again threatened to resign. This time, I only wanted a $500 increase. Well, Mayor Bazinet never acknowledged or responded to my request. And I was left with no other choice but to follow through with my threat and resign. Fortunately, I was appointed senior inspector for the penal institutions of the New York State Commission on Corrections. And 2 years later, I was appointed secretary for that commission. But I always wanted to be
George,
in...
I hate to interrupt, but I wouldn't want these good folks to misunderstand your motive for asking for salary increases or your willingness to resign. You were never a greedy man, and you really loved being chief of police.
You're right, Mary. I was never a greedy man, and I certainly loved being a policeman. But the biggest love in my life was my family. My wife, Mary, our sons, Wesley, George Jr., and our daughters, Marjorie and little Joni, were the most important thing in my life. And whatever adjustments I made, like asking for a leave of absence, asking for a salary increase, or even leaving my position with the FBI. I did it so that I could better support my family. You know, work in the private sector always pays more. But if I could not support my family on a police chief's salary, I would gladly give up the job I love.
You were indeed a good man.
Thank you, dear. I had a good life. But in 1953, my lungs started giving me problems. I died in November of 1960. And since I had been a long-term Mason, I had the privilege of a Mason's funeral.
So you see, if you were to measure George's life by the love he had in his life, he was not just a good man, but a truly great man.
Thank you for listening to our story.
Good day to all.